right, today we're going to talk about Russia and revolution. Let's go ahead and look at our handout. So it says, first of all, when we're looking at Russia, you might remember that Russia has a reputation. They're kind of like, they're big, but they're like really backwards compared to like the rest of Europe. In fact, something really embarrassing happened to Russia. It says on the handout that in 1904, Russia lost a humiliating defeat. And the question is, what country did they get in a 1-year fight with? And they should have won this war, but they didn't. Japan. We're going to write down that they were in a humiliating defeat to Japan. You might remember Japan had actually modernized. You might remember that Japan had actually, had industrialized, and that's one of the reasons why Japan was positioned to beat Russia. Well, a lot of people didn't like that, and it says on the handout on the second line that many Russians protested against Tsar Nicholas II, and they asked for reforms. And if you want to make Russia intellectually more modern, what philosophical movement are you fighting for? Exactly. Second line, they wanted reforms based on, you'll write down, the Enlightenment. That's what people wanted. So, okay, that's fine. The Tsar says he agrees to having some changes. And the third line, it says that the Tsar allowed for the creation of the so-called Duma, which was a representative, you'll write down, legislature. So he's like, okay, fine, you can vote for a bit. Now, the thing about the voting that they allowed in the Russian legislature, the Duma, it says that there was something that the legislature was not allowed to do. They were not allowed to criticize, you'll write down, the Tsar. And is that like real progress? Like, okay, I got to have this group of people, but they're not allowed to criticize the government? That's not really the kind of progress a lot of these people wanted to see. And it says on the handout that during World War I, things were a bit rough for Russia. It said Russia had one of the largest armies in the world, but you'll write down, it was poorly equipped. It was poorly equipped. What I mean by this is that there's a reason why Russia has this stereotype of being backwards, of being unprepared, of not being well situated for war. It says on your handout that actually many Russian soldiers went into war, you'll write down, without food or even guns. Without food or even guns. How do you go to war without guns? You might remember that on Thursday and Friday, we watched some video clips from a movie that showed trench warfare. And you know how they would like hide in these trenches, and then every once in a while be like, okay, it's time for us to run across that battlefield. Well, those guys, a lot of them like died pretty quickly as soon as that happened, right? A lot of these people died quickly as soon as that happened. And these soldiers go into war without any of these equipment. Yes, we are confirmed for today. Yeah, 4 o'clock, yeah. Today, 4 o'clock. Sorry, I was going to call you at lunch. Let me back. Oh, that's your wife. So they go without guns, without food. And it says on the handout that with massive losses, many Russians blamed the Tsar. And it says on your handout that he was forced to abdicate the throne. You know the word abdicate means to step down. And so here is the Tsar and his family, and they blamed him for all that was wrong in Russia. They thought, listen, you're the one that is the reason why we're not modern, why we haven't advanced, why we haven't stepped forward. They blamed the Tsar, and he was forced to abdicate or step down. And can you blame them? If he is sending out soldiers without even guns, Russia surely is backwards. It says on the handout, unfortunately for him, with his stepping down, the dynasty of the Romanov family, you'll write down, came to an end. And there's only one way you can make sure this dynasty can come to an end. What can you do to make sure that these children will never claim the throne? You will kill them. In fact, we know that the Romanov family had 4 daughters one of these four daughters is actually famous. The second to the right, her name is Anastasia. There's a 90s era animated cartoon. It's a princess movie called Anastasia, and it's about this princess who escapes Russia. There's this story that says that one of the daughters was not killed and that she was this princess in hiding. There's real no evidence for that. In fact, this is the room where Anastasia and the sisters were all shot against that wall. They did not survive. They were shot and they were killed as they were blamed. Even these children, these girls, blamed for the failures of Russia. It says the entire royal family was shot. And this is the very room where they were killed. Listen, Anastasia did not make it. Neither did her sisters. So that's pretty rough. And that's how this Russian Revolution begins. And what do we do now that the Tsar's gone? It says on your handout, with the Tsar gone, power was held by these so-called Soviets. A Soviet is a local council, you will write down. A Soviet is a local council. And now these Soviets, these local councils have decisions to make. What are we going to do now that the king is dead, the Tsar is gone? What kind of government should we embrace? Whose philosophy should we follow? They really get into the philosophy of this guy. This guy is one of the most famous men who ever lived. His name is Karl Marx. Not Santa Claus, it's Karl Marx in this picture. And he comes up with the idea called communism, which we'll be talking about with our time in Russia. It says, overwhelmingly, the Soviets rallied behind, you'll write down, the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party. It says on the handout that the socialists, which in Russia were called the Bolsheviks, embraced Marxism, which is named after this guy, Karl Marx. And Karl Marx, he wrote this book called The Communist Manifesto, and basically, we'll write down, what did Karl Marx want? He wanted, you'll write down, to redistribute the wealth. That's what Karl Marx believed in. That's what Marxism believes in, to redistribute the wealth. For example, if there are some of us in this room, let's say there's a girl who has a Jeep or something like that, or a Mercedes, right? Like, some of us have Mercedes that we drive to high school as a 16-year-old, and there's other kids who will take the bus all 4 years of their life. There's actually, listen, there are people who live in our community who the father rides a bike to a restaurant every day and works 50 hours, 60 hours a week, cooking, cleaning dishes, you know, working at a restaurant. Like, if you go to many restaurants, you'll see bicycles on the side of the restaurant. That's because men work 50, 60 hours. They don't have a car, but they'll ride. Karl Marx said, wouldn't it be better if we take the cars from 16-year-old girls? Wouldn't it be better if we take cars from 16-year-old boys and we redistribute it? I had one class where one student said every person in their house has a car. There's not one person in their house who doesn't own a car. There's other people who have 0 cars. As I mentioned, they use the bus to get around. They ride a bike to get around. Karl Marx would say that's not fair. What we should do is we should take cars from those of you who have them and redistribute it so everyone is equal. That's redistributing the wealth, and that's what Karl Marx wanted. It says on the handout that this leader of the Russian Marxist movement of communism was this guy on the handout, on the screen, Vladimir Lenin. He is the leader of this Russian Marxist, this Russian communist revolution. His name, one of the most important men who ever lived, was Lenin. And what do we do if we want everyone to be equal, if we want everyone to be the same, if we want everyone to be fair? Well, it says on your handout that Lenin moved to nationalize private property. He said, the problem is all of us in this room, we own private property. And because of that, there are rich people and there's poor people. Wouldn't it be better if what we did was the government said, I'm going to collect all of your property and then I'm going to redistribute it evenly. That would be better. Like, why would you want to live in a world where some of us have cars at 16 and others of us have our fathers riding a bike to work? Others have our moms waiting for a bus to get from one part of Houston to another at 11 o'clock at night because she's working her third shift or whatever the case may be. Wouldn't it be better if all of us gave all of our property to the government and the government said, I'm going to give it back equally? That's what Vladimir Lenin and that's what communism says we should do. No more private property. You don't own your house. You don't own your car. The government's going to make us equal. It says on the handout, the government would own all property. On the next line, the government would own all property. And here is, according to Lenin and according to Karl Marx, the most beautiful thing. Under communism, there would no longer, write down, there would be no longer rich or poor. Wouldn't you rather want to live in a country where there was no more poor people? Why wouldn't you want to live in a country without poor people anymore? Wouldn't it be better if we were all equal? Like, what could be wrong with that? In fact, it says, ideally under communism, all would be equal. You'll write down. Samantha, what's wrong with this? Would you be willing?
No.
Why? You want people to be poor?
No.
Do you have your own room in your house?
Yes.
There's people sleeping under bridges right now.
And that's terrible because my mom works for me.
Okay, well, you can keep the house, let's say, but do you really need your own room?
Yes.
It's not possible for you to share a room with one person, so that a homeless person doesn't have to sleep on a cement floor under a bridge.
That's terrible, but no, that's my room. I mean, I know it sounds shallow, but like, my mom works for that.
Oh gosh. And so Lenin would say, it doesn't sound like everyone in the room is enthused about helping people not be homeless anymore. And so Lenin has a solution for the people who have reservations about giving up their car or their rooms. He says this on the handout. He says the government or the state is an institution built up for the sake of exercising violence. Previously, the violence was exercised by a handful of money bags over the entire people. Now we want to organize this violence in the interest of the people. In other words, what Lenin says, back when we had a fancy king, the Czar, rich people used violence to hurt the poor people. Thankfully, we got rid of the king. We got rid of the Czar. Now, not all violence is good. Rich people violence against poor people violence, that's bad. But poor people violence against rich people who don't want to share, that's not only good, it's justifiable. It's actually commendable. How else am I going to deal with selfish people? How else should I deal with selfish people? We have to use violence. We'll see how that plays out. But it says on your handout on the next line, before the fighting was over, you'll write down, Russia decided to drop out, you'll write down, of World War I. Before World War I was over, they said, hey, you know what? We're just not going to be a part of this anymore. So many people are dying. So many people are losing their lives. They decided to drop out of World War I. See, some people are willing to share, while others are not.
Why didn't you just make the rich people buy more houses for the poor people? So they can have their own space.
Yeah.
No. But the whole point is to make everyone.
I feel like celebrities with money that they don't
But my job is the same. That's what I'm
Yeah, so like a doctor would be getting paid the same as like a janitor.
That's not. That's what I'm saying. That's what communism
That's what
is.
communism
No matter your position, you can't work up.
But we'll all be equal, so that's good.
No. That's what I'm saying. So
Wait.
now y'all agree with me.
Are you saying that you want to live in a world where you're better than someone else?
Yeah.
Yes. Life is a competition. That's I mean, the only way for you to be so high and successful, you have to be over other people.
That's how you.
Wow, that sounds.
Yeah, weren't you
So-
a communist or something?
Well, time out. Listen, hold up. I'm just asking the questions that you prefer a world where people are below you.
Yes.
If that, I mean, yeah. But it also gives everyone open opportunity to work up to somewhere.
All right.
If we're all equal, you can't get anywhere.
But
We're all below someone else.
but why would we want to be above someone?
So that
Wouldn't
you
it be better if we, instead of we're worried about who's better than the other, if we were side by side, equally taking on the challenges of this world?
No. How is that fair to someone that doesn't have a job and someone who works? So many hours. It's like
Yeah, like somebody could be slacking off and make the same as somebody who works there.
Are you saying in our society people don't slack off?
Oh no, I'm saying they do.
I mean,
That's why they get paid
can
more.
you imagine, are there any rich people who were born into wealth, they don't do anything but take pictures of themselves and they're billionaires?
That's some people.
Okay, you're saying you would rather live in a world where influencers who do nothing are millionaires, and while war vets with mental issues are homeless under a bridge. But thank God that influencer has $1 million.
That's their money. We're not going to be millionaires.
Okay, well, I hear what you're saying.
I'll be a millionaire.
I hear what you're saying. And
And
Lenin,
homeless people have resources.
Lenin would disagree with you. He would say, you guys are being selfish, Lenin would say.
Well, he's done.
So-
That's why he's balding.
On your handout,
Balding.
good argument, Cameron. No, that's not a good argument at all. It says on the handout, now, they get a name change, because, when you're having a new identity, you might switch things up, maybe change your name. And they changed their name from the Russian Empire to the Soviet Union. They're like, man, we got a cool new name. They are not called the Soviet Union anymore. They've had a breakup in the 90s. It was, they dropped out of World War I. So under the leadership, it says on your handout, of Leon Trotsky, the Soviet Union wanted to modernize. And so they wanted a modern army, and they get that. It says that Trotsky formed a modern fighting force, and this is a proper noun, so you're going to capitalize it. It was called the Red Army. The Red Army. I don't know if you know, but red is the official color of communism, which is why Lenin has the fancy red handkerchief. Nice.
Oh, is that why China
He's got the red banners all around him. Classy. And that's why China's flag is red. North Korea's flag has red. The Vietnamese flag had red. Red is the color theme they decided on. And their modern army is the Red Army. They're not. Communism fell in the late 80s, early 90s, which we'll hopefully get to on Friday. It says on the handout that even though this guy modernized the army, it says this. People thought this guy, Trotsky, wasn't revolutionary enough. In 1940, while in Mexico City, the later Soviet leader Joseph Stalin saw Trotsky as a threat and had Trotsky, you'll write down, killed. Even the guy who made the Soviet army a thing, they looked at him and said, you're not revolutionary enough. And he was executed. But he's not the only one. Because let's say that you raise your hand and say, I don't know if we should collect all the property and divide it up. Maybe there's some problems. Maybe some people worked harder than others. Intellectuals who questioned Lenin were arrested. You were arrested if you raised. Why would you question equality? You were thrown in jail. Another group of people that faced consequences, Lenin issued a decree calling for the execution of anti-Bolshevik priests, causing, you'll write down, 20,000 deaths. In other words, these priests also did not think an all-powerful government should be able to do the things that they're doing. These priests had hope in heaven, not in an all-powerful government. And as a result, 120,000 priests were killed. But it's not just priests, it was also peasants that stood in the way of utopia. Lenin, it says on the handout, called peasants who owned land and didn't want the government to take it. Well, he had a special word for them. Because listen, some people were making arguments like you're arguing. Some people said, hey, I wasn't born rich. My grandpa was poor. My dad was poor. We worked this land hard. Everything we have is because I work night, day, and weekends to make it happen. Some peasants said, I'm not going to give you my farm and my cows and my goats and my chickens and my horses. Some peasants resisted. And Vladimir Lenin thought these people were bad. In fact, there was a word he used to describe them. He said he called those people who didn't want the government to take their land, write down the word vampires. A vampire survives on what? On blood. Blood from who? From other people, right? A vampire doesn't do anything productive. They just live on the blood of others. In every movie you've seen, what should you do to a vampire?
Kill it with a wooden stake.
Yeah, and you're actually a hero if you kill the vampire. Lenin said rich peasants who don't want their property taken are vampires. They're actually sucking the blood of the poor people, and there's really nothing left to do but put an end to that threat. And that's what he wants to do in what we call the Red Terror. The Red Terror is the killing of farmers who didn't want to give up their land, and those who questioned communism were killed. We want to write down how many peasants, how many farmers, how many regular people were killed for questioning Lenin's communism. You'll write down 100,000. 100,000. All Lenin is trying to do is make a better world. All Lenin is trying to do is create a world where there's no rich and no poor, where everyone's equal, but not everyone's on the same page. And so Lenin will use the Russian Revolution to get everyone on the same page. We're going to go ahead and stop there.
Yeah, but all right.